hear me? I just want to check if everyone can hear me.
Yes.
All right. Okay. So don't worry about the slides. That was just an introduction, and I was just basically showing the title slide. Okay. So now I'm moving on to the next slide. With that said, since many of you are considering delivering your courses online or in blended mode, let me just quote Tony Bates, who is an expert in online learning. And he said, "It is not a good idea just to jump into it and hope to wing it. Teaching online is not rocket science, but it does need a different approach from classroom teaching." Okay, so let me just check again the chat because I saw some chat. Maybe this is for me. All right, okay. Um, so let me begin by saying that okay, that in an online or in a distance or a flexible learning environment, everything must be properly planned strategically. And when we talk of strategic planning, this basically starts with three questions. So as an institution, you have to ask yourselves, where are you now? Where do you want to go? And how do you get there? Now, to answer the question, where you are right now, um, you should do two types of assessment. So basically, there are two types of assessment that can be done. First is an internal assessment, and the other is an external assessment. For internal assessment, you should assess your learners on an institutional level in terms of age, their current location, learning style or preferences, and their access to technology. So you can design your instructions appropriately, including the mode of delivery. You also need to assess the nature of academic programs and courses in terms of competencies, conceptual knowledge, values and skills, and practical skills. And then, of course, you also need to assess the available resources in terms of capacity of teachers, availability of IT staff, and also in terms of quality assurance. This webinar series being organized by Silliman University is a very good program that capacitates its human resources. And then you also need to assess your financial resources. Um, Sorry, can you hear me? I have to shift to, wait. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, Joe.
Sorry.
Yes, yes. Very clear.
Test, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you loud
All
and
right, sorry for that. I had some problem with my earpod. All right, okay. So moving on, um, you have to assess your sorry, I was still in the internal assessment. Okay, so you have to assess as well your available facilities, your IT infrastructures, and other available technology, as well as the time for your faculty and staff. And then you need to do also an external assessment. You need to assess the current public health environment. Are you now on modified MCGQ? What are the government issued public health policies on the national level and on the local level? What are the needs of your students? You have to consider your students' health, not just their physical well-being, but it is important that you also consider their mental well-being. And there are a number of research studies now showing that focusing on the mental health of the students, there is definitely a need for flexibility in this time of global public health crisis. So we have to consider that there are many implications to your students, many implications brought about by the pandemic, including probably loss of lives, displacement, unemployment, separation from family members, lack of spiritual support, political instability, lack of sports and cultural activities, and other social activities that may affect their mental and emotional status. And then, of course, you have to assess the regulatory framework of CHED and of course, other institutions that need to that you are affiliated with. And then what are the assistive programs such as training and available resources to support faculty members? And then you also have to consider the parental support. Are the parents consulted? Are they supportive? And you also have to assess institutional linkages. In this time of crisis, sharing of resources is critical, as well as sharing of expertise. And then, of course, you also have to consider what are the academic offerings of other educational institutions. Okay, now, after assessing your current situation, you need to be clear as to where do you want to go. So you have to ask yourselves, why are you getting into online teaching and learning? Is this just a temporary solution to a public health emergency? Is this just an emergency response and you intend to go back to business as usual after the pandemic? Or you're actually responding to the changes in the educational landscape and you want to promote lifelong learning, develop digital literacy, and enhance 21st century skill? Or you are looking into promoting inclusivity by offering flexibility in your program and course offering? Okay. Once you have answered the first two questions, you can now determine the kind of distance teaching and learning that you need to pursue in the short, medium, and long term, and identify the strategy on how you will get there. So for some institutions, they go into remote teaching and treat this as a transitional approach, and they would rather not invest in it in the long term. When the global public health crisis struck us, so when we started the lockdown in March, there was an agreement among educational organizations. Early on, other countries started early with their lockdown. And organizations like UNESCO, World Bank, and other major universities abroad differentiated emergency remote teaching and learning from online learning. So they defined emergency remote teaching as a temporary shift of instructional delivery to an alternate delivery mode due to crisis circumstances. And the primary objective in these circumstances is not to recreate a robust educational ecosystem, but rather to provide temporary access to instruction and instructional supports in a manner that is quick to set up and is reliably available during an emergency or crisis. So that's one way to look at it. But then other institutions may find the need to do blended learning, combining online interaction and face-to-face meetings. Others may find the internet connectivity is a major constraint. So for most of your students, you would need to combine a print-based or an analog and digital technologies for those who really do not have internet connectivity. And for some institutions, the current situation presents an opportunity to pursue open and distance learning as a long-term vision, an opportunity to transition to more flexible modes of delivery to reach more students. So if this is your institution's plan, you need to look for ways to establish steps and milestones in the short and medium term that will allow you to transition to more flexible modes of instruction. Okay. Now, when you're doing your strategic plan, when you, since you're planning to go to deliver your courses via distance mode, you have to consider the various components when offering a course via distance learning or via remote learning. So there are four major components when planning for an online or distance learning programs or courses. So these are the four major components. Um, the first component is course design and development. So this is the time where you will develop your course materials, and you need to determine who will be involved, who will be the course writers, who will be part of the quality circle team. There should be a reader, instructional designer, a multimedia specialist, another content expert that would validate the content of the course material that you are developing. And then after you have developed the course materials, you have to look into the teaching and learning or course delivery. How do you intend to deliver the courses? What type of delivery mode will you adapt? And then you also need to consider how will you provide student support. Um, this is very critical because in distance learning, there is that what we call a transactional distance. This is not just the physical distance, but the psychological distance between the teacher and the learner. And because of that gap, there are many implications or many problems and challenges that sometimes arise because of that gap. Which is why it is very important to establish a very strong student support system. So you should have a tech support, a help desk, library support, information services, guidance, and counseling. You would be surprised that when you start offering your courses online or via distance learning, you would be overwhelmed by the number of concerns and queries from your student. This is because of this distance, and that's why it is important that when you do this, you need to do it right. You have to really plan for it. And then there's the organization and management. You need to revisit your policies and structure and your systems that will support online or blended or distance type of teaching and learning. Okay. Now, just a quick review. There are basically three types of delivery mode. So first, of course, is the face-to-face or classroom teaching. And this is what you are used to as a residential university. Then there's online learning. Online learning is actually a type of distance learning that takes place online. Since it's online, it requires internet connectivity. And online learning is really not something new. It has been around for decades. There are already existing research studies, theories, models, standards, and evaluation criteria that focus on quality online learning, online teaching, online course design, online student support, and online assessment. And although online learning somehow carries a stigma of being lower quality than face-to-face learning, this is despite research showing otherwise. There have been a number of research studies conducted showing that online learning, if properly planned and designed, is at par or even better than traditional learning. And yet there is still that negative perception among educators. Now, this hurried moves to suddenly transition to online mode by many institutions could indeed make this perception a reality, considering that online teaching requires careful planning and design in terms of pedagogy and technology, taking full advantage of the affordances of online learning. Okay, so let me just show the various categories of an online course. It can be web presence. You just use the web to disseminate vital information. It can be web enhanced. So this is actually some type of a blended learning. And it can be fully online, where there is a learning management system that you use as a virtual classroom, and everything, all the interaction happens in that virtual classroom. Okay, so now the third mode of delivery is the fully online. In a fully online courses are these are courses for credit, which usually cover the same content, skills, and assessment as a campus-based version. Non-credit courses offered online, such as courses for continuing professional education. And there's also the fully open courses. Maybe you have heard of the massive open online courses. Someone's raising the hand. I'm not sure if Dave, someone's raising the hand.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm not sure if they
I'm
have. Can they
I,
hear me?
Yeah, I am monitoring the question, Dr. Joanne.
All right. Okay. Thank you. Okay. So going back, so there are also, I'm sure many of you, because of this pandemic, you have explored a number of massive open online courses. UPOU is offering a number of massive open online courses, but the more popular MOOCs are those from Coursera and edX and other platforms that offer massive open online courses. And then, of course, there's the open educational resources, which are available for free. You can download them online, which either instructors or students can access to support teaching and learning. Okay. Sorry, I think that's the second one. The first one is the classroom, then the online, and then the third mode of delivery is the blended learning. So when we talk of blended learning, it is a mix of e-learning and traditional teaching. Refers to a strategic and systematic approach to combining times and modes of learning, integrating the best aspects of face-to-face and online interaction using appropriate ICTs. Now, blended learning encompasses a wide variety of designs. If we will look at the literature, it would even include the use of technology as classroom aids. So it includes technology enhanced learning. And then the more popular one is the use of a learning management system. Like for UPOU, we are using a Moodle-based platform to support classroom teaching for storing learning materials, set readings, and online discussions. And there's what we call as the flipped classroom. This is a type of blended learning wherein students gain necessary knowledge before going to class through the materials uploaded online. Instructors guide students to actively apply that knowledge during class. So every material should be gone through by the students. They should have watched videos. They should have read the materials before going to class for an actual interaction with their teacher. Abroad, there are programs wherein there is a 1 semester on a residential type campus and 2 semesters online. There's also a model wherein there's a shortened time on campus, spent on campus hands-on experience or training, preceded or followed by a concentrated time spent studying online. So that's another model. And there's the type of blended learning which we call the hybrid or flexible learning, which requires the redesign of teaching so that students can do the majority of their learning online, coming to campus only for very specific face-to-face teaching such as lab or hands-on practical work that cannot be done satisfactorily online. In hybrid learning, the whole learning experience is redesigned with a transformation of teaching on campus built around the use of technology. Okay, so those are the three types of mode of delivery. This figure, if you will look at it, this is the continuum of technology-based teaching. So on the far left is the face-to-face, the far right is the fully online, and in between are the blended type of learning. Okay. Now, let us take a look at some terminologies. I'm sure you are probably confused. There have been a number of terminologies coming out with CHED issuing advisories and memorandum circular on what type of learning should happen in this uh, um, new normal of education. Also, DepEd has its own advisories. So let's just take a look at some of these terminologies. So what they're using now is remote teaching and learning. When you say remote teaching and learning, it is actually characterized by flexibility. This means that students and teachers are physically separated from each other in some parts or throughout the course. So interaction between them is both synchronous and or asynchronous and will be mostly technology mediated. Students spend less time listening to lectures, but more on doing learning activities and are therefore outcomes based. And then learners have increased choice, convenience, and personalization. And this type of learning provides learners with choices about where, when, and how learning occurs. And as I've said, courses are activity and outcomes based. Now, compared to conventional teaching, in which what happens in the class is decided mostly by the teacher. In a remote teaching and learning, or in a flexible model, uh, flexible models have moving parts to consider. So as you adapt more flexible modes of delivery, you will need to implement adjustments in your academic and administrative systems to manage the transition effectively. So other terms, so that you would just have an idea what are these terms. You have heard about open learning. So open learning is a vision of an educational system in which education is accessible to every individual and with minimal restrictions. And it emphasizes the flexibility of the system to eradicate problems caused by barriers like age, geographical locations, time constraints, and economic situations. Okay. And then there's also distance education. You have heard of this distance education or distance learning. So in this modality, learner and teacher are separated from each other for most, if not throughout the learning process. So technical media, print, audio, video, or computer are used to deliver the learning content. And there is, of course, communication between teacher and learner. And educational institution is involved in the planning, preparation, delivery, and accreditation of learning. That's why prior to this pandemic, there was this law, the RA 10650, wherein CHED monitors institutions that are offering distance education, because they have a criteria that only level 3 programs can be offered distance education, can be offered via distance education. And then there's e-learning. E-learning is any technologically supported learning using teaching and learning tools that utilize electronic media. So in e-learning, it does not always follow that it is online. So as long as it makes use of learning tools or electronic media. Okay, and then you, of course, you've also heard about mobile learning. Mobile learning is e-learning through mobile devices such as smartphones or tablets. Now, let us look at some other related terms because this is important so that you would know what specific approach in teaching and learning are you currently doing. So you have heard of correspondence education, home study, independent study, external studies, continuing education, self-instruction, adult education, technology-based or mediated education, learner-centered education, flexible learning, and distributed learning. Now, if we look at these various terms, when these terms, correspondence education, home study, and independent study, are somehow used interchangeably. These distance learning methods are, very old. This is actually probably the ancestor of distance education. So this is based on a standalone self-study materials. Learners do not have to leave their homes to study, and this is often print-based with communication through postal services or telephone. They can, however, use a variety of means for tutor-learner contact, including postal system, telephone, electronic mail, television and radio broadcast, and video and audio cassettes, because during those times, there are no internet yet. And then you have heard of external studies. So it applies to instruction that takes place somewhere other than on a central campus, such as a classroom remote from campus. It includes a variety of delivery options like audio, video, or computer conferences or home study. And then, of course, you've heard of continuing education. I'm sure Silliman is offering a continuing education program. It usually applies to non-credit education. It refers to courses that can be delivered on campus or at a distance. And then there's the self-instruction, which refers to a process in which materials take learners step by step through an instructional process. And there are self-assessment exercises, which is the central feature of this type of this approach. And instruction can be paper-based or computer-based. And then there's adult education. So this term emphasizes the principles of adult learning, often known as andragogy, compared to pedagogy or child-centered learning. Now, technology-based or mediated education, this refers to systems of teaching and learning in which a technology other than print has a major role, and it takes the form. It can be standalone or through a or via conferenced format. And then there's the learner-centered education. It's a flexible sequence of study, negotiated objectives and content, negotiated learning methods, negotiated methods of assessment, and a choice of support mechanisms. And then there's flexible learning, which emphasizes the creation of environments for learning that have the following characteristics. Convergence of open and distance learning methods, media and classroom strategies, learner-centered philosophy, recognition of diversity in learning styles and learner needs, recognition of curriculum and pedagogy, use of a variety of learning resources and media, and fostering of lifelong learning habits and skills in learners and staff. And then there's what we call the distributed learning, which emphasizes the learning itself rather than the type of technology used or the separation between teacher and learner. So it makes learning possible beyond classrooms. And when you combine this type of learning with classroom modes, it now becomes flexible learning. Now, let me just emphasize that teaching via online mode is very different from teaching in a face-to-face context. And it is important for everyone to realize that you cannot just convert what you have been doing in your face-to-face classes to an online and distance learning environment. Remember, unlike in face-to-face context wherein you see your students every day and you can just basically wing your discussions with your, of course, because we have prepared your lesson plan. In online and distance learning, every aspect should be planned ahead, from learning outcomes, selecting learning resources, designing individual and collaborative activities to assessment. Everything should be properly planned. And because this is to ensure that students will get the optimal learning experiences despite the limitation posed by physical distance between the teachers and the learners. Okay, now the alternative forms that I have mentioned, they have something in common, and this is that all of them or most of them embrace the 21st century pedagogy that spouses a shift towards student-centered teaching and learning. So we have to shift our mindset from the chalk and talk type of teaching, wherein we as teachers, we just transfer our knowledge to our students as if they're empty buckets that need to be filled up. And now that this unusual circumstance has forced us to explore a different mode of teaching, it is imperative now more than ever that we leave the what we call the sage on the stage thinking and become more of a guide on the side, who are more concerned with facilitating learning and guiding students in their learning and discovery. Now, this approach is important in remote teaching and learning, and online learning and distance learning, our active learning methods that emphasize learner involvement, learning by doing and thinking, and connecting ideas are given importance. But just to emphasize, being a guide on the side does not mean that as teachers we will not teach anymore. This just means that we redefine our role and become facilitators of learning. In this new approach, teachers do not just give lectures and deliver content, but also provide the appropriate learning scaffolding for students to undergo optimal learning experiences, acquire values, gain competencies, and apply these learnings to the real world. So you can see in the screen the type of learner-centered affordances that your student can experience. Okay. Now, one of the common mistakes of teachers who are starting to shift to an online mode of learning is the extreme obsession with technology and tend to forget the other equally important issues such as instructional design, course development, and assessment. Now, we have now witnessed how digital technologies have transformed education in the past decade or so. And this is definitely true in this time of global health crisis. Our lives would definitely be unimaginable without our digital devices. Hence, it is important that we make technology work for us and not the other way around, especially in terms of teaching and learning. So, at this point in time, let me just share with you this very useful framework uh, for an online type of learning that you will be doing, because an online teaching and learning is basically technology enhanced. So this we call this the technological pedagogical content knowledge, TPCK framework. This is a useful framework for understanding what it takes to teach effectively using technology. Since online learning relies heavily on the use of technology, let us explore how to maximize these affordances. Now, this framework highlights the dynamic interplay between and among the various components of teacher knowledge in terms of technology, pedagogy, and content. Now, the framework identified three primary forms of knowledge. First, of course, is the content knowledge. The second is the pedagogical knowledge, and third is the technological knowledge. And the center of the diagram, otherwise known as the TPCK, it represents a full understanding of how to teach with technology. Now, this framework was developed to explain the set of knowledge that teachers need to teach their students a subject, teach effectively, and use technology. Now, you have to keep in mind that this is not the same as having knowledge of each of the three primary concepts individually. So, aside from understanding each component individually, the CK, PK, and TK, it is also important to look at these components in pairs. So we have PCK, TCK, and TPK. And all three taken together, this is the TPCK. Now, the point of this framework, this TPCK framework, is to understand how to use technology to teach concepts in a way that enhances student learning experiences. This is very important because sometimes when we shift to online learning, online teaching and learning, teachers become so obsessed with the learning management system as if everything that matters now is the LMS. But LMS, it's just one tool and one technology. That's why this framework is very important, because this is a reminder that there is actually a dynamic interplay that happens among content, pedagogy, and technology, which actually enhances and allows students to have that optimal learning experience. Now, even before the disruption in education brought about by this pandemic, teachers often treat technology as if it is separate from teaching and learning. I'm sure you have attended a number of webinars or workshops on how to teach effectively, but did not include discussion on what technology and tools to use in the learning activities. And likewise, there are many workshops and webinars and trainings conducted on the use of some specific software or app, but how this technology fits in your teaching and learning approach is not discussed. Now, Mishra and Kohler pointed out that this separation of discussion of pedagogy and technology leads to four problems. First is the rapid changes in technology make it extremely difficult to keep up with all the latest advancement in apps. Every day, hundreds of apps, probably now with this pandemic that's happening right now, thousands of apps are being developed, and advances in technology lead to the development of a technology that contributes to the rapid doubling of human knowledge. Now, futurist experts estimate that in 2020, human knowledge doubles every 12 hours. So 12 hours ago, there's a different set of knowledge, and 12 hours after, there's another knowledge that has been developed. That's how fast knowledge is being developed now. So it is important that we just don't focus on knowing how to use that technology. And then second, software and apps are mainly designed for business. If you will notice, there have been a number of LMS that have been developed by publishers, and they're offering it for free. But basically, it's not really free, but it's a business model, because you have to avail of the content that they developed, which are being delivered through their software or LMS. This means that students are learning how to use the program and tools, and not learning the content of the class. Basically, the content have not really been developed or produced by you as the teacher, but they have been imposed upon you by the publishers who developed the LMS. And number three, the situational nature of the class. A teacher can adjust a lesson to make sure it meets the needs of the specific group of students, but the technology cannot do this. Although there are new adaptive technology, it still cannot replace the judgment of a teacher. And then fourth is the emphasis on what and not how. This means that the lesson becomes about what technology are we going to use, what does it say, what skills that does it require, instead of how can I teach my students. Okay. Now, the assumption here is that when teachers teach with technology, three elements interact, forming several knowledge intersections. As I mentioned, there's this first form, the pedagogical knowledge, or PK, which describes teachers' deep knowledge of the practices, processes, and methods regarding teaching and learning. As a generic form of knowledge, PK encompasses the purposes, values, and aims of education, and may apply to more specific areas, including the understanding of student learning styles, classroom management skills, lesson planning, and assessment. Basically, this is your knowledge on how to teach, or the teaching strategies and principles that you apply when you are doing your teaching. And then there's the technological knowledge, or TK, which describes teachers' knowledge of and ability to use various technologies, technological tools, and associated resources. Now, this is very important because there are some teachers who are not technological technological savvy. They would call themselves that way. But now that we are in this mode of learning and teaching, mode of teaching and learning, this is not something that is a choice for us anymore. We really need to capacitate ourselves on how to use this technology. So this is not a question of should I learn or not, but it's really how fast can I learn, and how many tools can I learn, because it's very important that you now have the technological knowledge. And then, of course, the content knowledge. So this is a given, but of course, this is something that should be discussed because it describes the teacher's own knowledge of the subject matter. It may include knowledge of concepts, theories, evidence, and organizational framework within a particular subject matter. It may also include the field's best practices and established approaches to communicating this information to students. Okay. Now, this can be a combination of pedagogical content knowledge, or the PCK. It has to do with the teacher's knowledge of how his or her subject matter should be taught. It focuses on promoting learning and on tracing the links among pedagogy and its supportive practices. For example, if you're a math teacher, you should know how your subject matter should be taught. Then we have what we call the technological content knowledge, or TCK, which refers to knowledge of how the use of technology impacts on the subject matter, including how it is represented, organized, and learned. So it involves understanding how the subject matter can be taught through the use of appropriate technology best suited for specific subject matter. So again, like for example, if you're teaching math, you should know what kinds or types of technology are appropriate for you to teach your content or your subject matter. Then we have the technological pedagogical knowledge, or the TCK, technological, sorry, that should be TPK. It refers to knowing what technology to use for a particular teaching task, um, knowing how to use a particular technological tool to achieve a particular learning outcome or set of outcomes, and knowing what pedagogical strategies are appropriate and effective, and using technologies according to these strategies. Now, if you put all this together, this is the main point of the framework, which is combining all these forms. So TPCK requires an understanding of the representation of concepts using technologies, pedagogical techniques that use technologies and constructive ways to teach content, knowledge of what makes concepts difficult or easy to learn, and how technology can help address some of the problems that students face, knowledge of students' prior knowledge and theories of epistemology, and knowledge of how technologies can be used to build on existing knowledge and to develop new epistemologies or strengthen old ones. So I hope this framework will help you now that you are intending to transition to an online teaching and learning. Now, in order for teachers to make effective use of TPCK framework, you should be open to certain key ideas. So you should be open that concepts from the content being taught can be represented using technology. Number two, pedagogical techniques can communicate content in different ways using technology. Number three, different content concepts require different skill levels from students, and technology can help address some of these requirements. And number four, students come into classroom with different backgrounds, including prior educational experience and exposure to technology, and lessons utilizing technology should account for this possibility. And five, technology can be used in tandem with students' existing knowledge, helping them either strengthen prior epistemologies or develop new ones. Okay. Now, okay, time check. It's 3 p.m. Um, Now, let me just highlight this another. This is not really a framework, but a figure showing the various interactions in online and distance learning. Because there's that misconception that in an online environment or in a distance learning environment, there are no interactions that happen anymore. But this is actually emphasized if you will look at the literature on online teaching and distance learning. Interaction has always been valued in distance learning, even in its most traditional or independent study format. That's why when I was telling you earlier about the first generation, because the technology was quite limited during that time, it was print based, and everything was delivered via postal services. The interaction happened uh, during a once a month face-to-face interaction with the teacher, and also the interaction happened with the content of the print module. That's why the materials are developed in such a way that it actually became the teacher. So the module was the one teaching the students. So it stands as the teacher. So that was the uh, time of the first generation type of distance education. Okay, so there are different forms of interaction in online and distance learning. So these are the different types of educational interaction. So there's the learner-learner, learner-teacher, teacher-teacher, teacher content, learner content, and then the content. So when we talk of learner-learner interaction, so these are the interactions among your students. So it could be one to many. So one student can be interacting with many learners, like probably make a presentation to the class, or it can be class-based, as when learners are asked to share their views and react to those of others. In online courses, this is usually done through, if it's synchronous, it can be done through chat sessions, or if it's asynchronous, then it can be done through discussion forums. Now, it is important to highlight that in this type of learning environment, the learner-learner interaction can happen even without the presence of the teacher. That's why they become more of an independent type of learning, because they can interact among themselves. So you can post, for example, in an asynchronous type of interaction, you can post a discussion forum question, and then you can allow your students to interact among themselves. They can debate, they can argue, um, and that's a form of learner-learner interaction. Or they can even form an outside group chat outside of the discussion forum, that's aside from the discussion that's happening in the discussion forum. Okay. Another form of learner-learner interaction is if a teacher design a group or a collaborative activity, and then the learners interact among themselves on how to accomplish or how to perform that particular activity. Okay, and then of course there's the learner-teacher interaction. So these are learning activities where the learner relies on the teacher for feedback. So for example, written tests, oral examinations, and tutor mark assignments are examples of this type of activity. Now, the feedback provided by the teacher in these activities help learners to learn more effectively, improve their motivational state, clarify their understanding of the content, and facilitates their progress in the course. So, the teacher provides feedback, provides synthesis, and provides other forms of information that would enhance the learning of the student. So, this is a form of learner-teacher interaction. And then, of course, there's the learner-content interaction. Now, a learner interacts with content by undertaking a learning task independently or by him or herself. Examples of this type of learning activity are answering self-assessment questions, reflecting on an assigned reading, taking a quiz where feedback is automated, as in online quizzes. These activities allow students to ascertain their understanding of the content and immediately apply it to their immediate context. Okay. Now, there's what we call the teacher-teacher interaction. Now, the teacher-teacher interaction in this type of interaction, this can be in various formats. So it can be in the form of an organized type, wherein teacher of a particular subject, of a common subject, can meet regularly and to discuss their practices, the challenges that they encounter, or they can share strategies with each other, especially if this is the first time that many of you will be teaching your courses online. So it's always a good idea to interact among each other, because it allows you to learn new strategies and adapt it to your own class. It's always good to know that you can always apply a new strategy in your classroom. Or probably it's a good way if there's a teacher who can also share an assessment practice to you, so that you can use it for your class. You can also do a teacher-teacher interaction, wherein you can do a collaborative research on how to improve your delivery of the courses online. So these are examples of teacher-teacher interaction. It can also be in the form of professional development uh, and support through a scholarly community of teachers. There can also be a community of practice. So if you will look at online, there are a number of discussion fora, community of teachers there online who are sharing their practices or experiences in terms of content, technology, and pedagogy. So it's always good to be part of this, and this is a form of teacher-teacher interaction. Now, for teacher content interaction, it focuses on the creation of content and learning activities by you as teachers. So it's very important that you develop activities that promote higher order thinking skills so that will manifest in the content that you have developed. And it allows teachers to continuously monitor and update the content, resources, and activities that you create for student learning. So it doesn't mean that once you have developed your online courses or online or your course material or instructional materials, that they will be static anymore, that you will not be improving on it anymore. By reflecting on the feedback from your students, by reflecting on evaluation done by the institution, you should take this as a form of teacher content interaction wherein you continuously update your material based on evidences. Okay. And then of course there's the content interaction. So in this type of interaction, oftentimes content is programmed to interact with other automated information sources as to refresh itself constantly and to acquire new capabilities. So this is like a machine to machine communication. Um, but this would be, of course, difficult if it's a print-based material, which is why this mainly applies to content interaction when it's delivered online and there's an automated component of it. Okay. Now, it is also important that we take into consideration when you are planning for an online and distance learning that there are design principles that you need to consider. I will not be dealing with this in depth because I'm sure this will be tackled in other of your webinars. But just to give you an idea of the 4 principles that you need to bear in mind, especially that you are designing instruction that integrates technology. So when you are designing instruction that integrates technology, it is quite different from the usual instructional design that you do for traditional learning or the conventional type of learning. So the first is you design for learning outcomes. Let's go back to your learning outcomes, and then you design based on that. And then you have to design for your learners. That's why there should be a comprehensive analysis of your learners, understanding their different characteristics. And then, of course, you have to design with digital resources and technologies. And then you have to design for dialogue or interaction with others. So these are the 4 principles of instructional design that you have to consider now that you are that you will be delivering your courses online or via a flexible learning environment. Okay. Now let me just run through this because I think this is important. The various roles that you will be doing now that you are teaching online. Um, this will probably be tackled in your other webinars, but I just wanted this to discuss this because you will see how different your role now would be now that you will be doing your teaching online. So the role of an online teacher can be categorized in 4 dimensions. And these are pedagogical, social, managerial, and technical. So unlike in a conventional or in a face-to-face type of teaching, the teacher basically has just one role. It's just to teach, just be present in front of your students, and then you deliver a lecture. Make sure that your students know when you assess them, they would be able to answer. And then there's that. Because you are always present and you are always able to interact with your students. But now that you are doing all of this online, and as I've said, when you are teaching online, there is that distance. It's a transactional distance, and you should always be aware and cautious of this transactional distance. You will not always be at the same time. You will not always be at the same status and context, which is why you have to consider that distance between you and your learners. So it's not just a distance between time and space, but it's also that psychological distance that oftentimes lead to the feeling of isolation, feeling of ambiguity of students, feeling of are they alone? Are they by themselves? Is my teacher supporting me? That's why when you are now teaching online, you take on a different role. So let us take a look at these different roles. Okay, so there's this what we call the pedagogical role. So uh, in this pedagogical dimension, you have a role as a course designer. So you design interactive learning experience, structure course materials, refine and update learning materials. So now that you will be um, transitioning or shifting to an online type of learning, um, you will be the one to design and design and develop your course materials, uh, which makes you a course designer. Now, in order to do that, of course, you should know the design principles and the different tasks that is involved in developing your course materials. Okay, so you are the course designer and you develop your course material. So after you have done this, you now become a professions inspirer. So you promote professional dialogue among online learners. You relate personal experiences and cases to the discipline, point to professional organizations. So this for professional organizations, this is specifically true for probably graduate programs wherein they already have specific professions when they go to classes. But you have to promote. You become a profession inspirer here. So, for example, you are teaching accounting students, then you should promote professional dialogue among online learners who are taking accountancy. And then, of course, another role is that you are a feedback giver. So you provide timely and high quality feedback. You provide formative feedback for continuous learning engagement. So unlike in a conventional teaching and learning wherein you face your students, so if they have questions, you can immediately provide feedback. But when you're doing this online, you will receive the questions in a written form. I mean, they will be posting this in a discussion forum, or if there's a functionality there wherein they will post their questions. And then it is your role as a feedback giver. So you should provide feedback to them. And based from experiences, this could actually be very overwhelming, especially imagine, unlike in a class, when you ask them, um, a group of 30 students, maybe just 5 or 7 students would be asking questions. Many would be shy to ask questions, and if one student asks a question and they would think that, oh, that's the same question that I wanted to ask, so they would keep quiet already. But in an online format, you can imagine how many questions you would receive, because it would be easy to write down their questions. So you would probably feel overwhelmed with the number of questions and inquiries that you will be receiving from your students. So you have to somehow structure the type of feedback, or the the how and the type of feedback that you would be giving to them. You probably just provide a synthesis instead of answering each question individually. And then you are also the interaction facilitator. So you facilitate peer interaction in online discussion through a wide range of facilitation strategies. This is very important because you don't want the interaction or the discussion forum be monopolized by some students. So you have to monitor, you have to set guidelines on how the interaction should happen. Okay, and then also there's the managerial role. You are the conference manager. So this is actually related to what I was discussing earlier. You should ensure equity in online discussion. Um, this can be done by providing specific rules and guidelines on how the discussion would happen. So you should be very clear when providing these guidelines to the students so that they would follow this instead of them just asking randomly, sporadically. They would prepare their answers based on your guidelines, and this will actually promote a deeper learning because they would really prepare for it. Um, but again, and this is important. What is important here is that you provide rules and guidelines. And then you are also the organizer and planner. So you provide clear instructions and organization of course structure, achieve a balance between structure and flexibility. So as an online teacher, it's important that you have a very comprehensive course guide. And when I talk about course guide, this is not just a course outline or a course syllabus or a syllabi. A course guide is a very comprehensive guide that includes all the guidelines and all the schedules that will happen in your online class. Again, you have to remember that you're not always there to provide information to students because you will not really be meeting synchronously anymore all the time if this is fully online. But of course, if there's a face-to-face component of it, then that's the time wherein students can actually clarify questions. But if it will be done online, I would suggest that you strategically plan when and how you will conduct your synchronous discussion, because it will be very tiring for you and for the students who do not have access to the internet. They would be disadvantaged if you will always be holding a synchronous discussion. Okay, so this is part of your role. You have to organize and plan, and of course you should um, be a social rapport builder. So you should build social rapport, establish online teams, and build online learning community. So when you set up your course site in your learning management system, you should build a rapport with your students. Otherwise, it would be very formal and structured, and students would not know how to start the course and would be very would not feel comfortable in that particular course. Especially learning management systems are not really designed like a Facebook type of design. So it's more structured and more organized, which is why it's important that you as a teacher, you should provide social rapport. Okay? And then, of course, there, you are also a technical coordinator. What does it mean? You refer students to technical support and communicate technical issues. Remember, you will be mainly dealing with your students. So they would be having various kinds of concerns, specifically technical problems, technical support, which is why in my discussion in the earlier portion of my talk, it's important that there is a clearly established student support system so that you as a teacher can just refer to that student support system the concerns of your students. But of course, this is still your role. When your students ask you about a specific technical concern, then you should be ready uh, where, where do you need to refer their concerns to, okay? And then also, you are a media designer now. So you have to develop multimedia tools, identify and co-design efficient learning tools. Based on experience, very difficult to always do a synchronous lecture. That's why most of our discussion, most of our interaction at GPOU are really done asynchronously. And then we just develop some media, for example, videos, wherein students can watch them at their own convenience, because we do not know the context of our students anymore. For example, you set, okay, let's meet at every day at 2 p.m. But then probably in their area, there's brownout or there's no internet connectivity. The student does not have money to pay for load, then they will be disadvantaged. But if you develop materials, like for example, video recordings of your lecture, and then students can just access them later or at their own convenience, then even those students who do not have internet access will not be disadvantaged. Okay, okay, and then the last role is the technology integrator. So you should use highly interactive tools to facilitate high quality online interaction. You should look for apps and other tools and technology that can help you facilitate interactive, high quality online interaction. That's why in my previous discussion, it's important that you as a teacher should have the technological knowledge. It's not enough that you would depend so much on others, but it's important that you do your own research and just probably ask support from your ICT office. But it's important that you also know how to make use and how to integrate this technology. Okay, I think that is the end of my discussion. Um,
Mm.
yeah, I think that's the end of my discussion. It was a long talk, but I hope it was clear to everyone. So I will stop sharing now and yeah, turn over to Dave.
Thank you, Doc Serrano, and that's a wonderful sharing. And some of my takeaways, it's not anymore a choice. I love that. It's not anymore a choice of learning and embracing technology oriented teaching and learning. And I one of my take home also is develop multimedia tools, identify a co-design efficient learning tools. And I like also your sharing about less synchronous, especially on the conducting a video conference every day or every schedule, because the term there, the keyword is it's gonna be a less advantage to some or many of the students, considering again of infrastructure or comfortability and convenience among the students. But to all the attendees now, we are now ready for the open forum. And open forum is if you have if you have your if you have your microphone, please make sure to unmute your microphone. And if you have a video, you can also start your video, and please talk audibly so that everyone can hear loud and clear. Okay, but I think there is one question here, Dr. Serrano, and let me read. What is the maximum number of students in an online learning per teacher? And the follow-up question is, what is the maximum number of preparations per teacher?
Okay, so I'll just be answering based on experience and based on our practice here at GPOU. So um, for one teacher, we are handling basically 30 students, and then after 30 students, 31 up to 60, then you can have a tutor. So that's another section wherein you can get a tutor. So a tutor, uh, just to explain that context, because in online teaching and learning, the course materials have already been developed. So there's already a course pack. So you are just going to deliver it. basically, delivery means you will facilitate discussion, answer questions from your students, mark their assignments and exams. So that's the role of the next tutor. So you have an FIC. For example, I'm an FIC and I'm handling 100 students. So I can break them down into 3 to 4 sections, and then I can get tutor for each section. And that tutor can help me facilitate the discussion per section, mark the assignments and the activities as well as the exam.
Mm.
And then maximum number of preparation per teacher. Is that the course, the teaching load?
Yes, I think that refers to the teaching load, like how many different subjects per
Okay.
teacher.
So again, this is based on experience. I mean, from the UPOU. So our full load is 12 units. So that's basically 4 courses. But we can actually handle just 2 courses. Uh, the other is for research and public service.
Mm. Okay. Thank you very much. We have another question also. Actually, this was posted at 3:21 p.m. With the long experience in online education of UPOU, what are the university's best practices in online education? I think the attendee refers to, I think, a more unique practices perhaps in running an online education, or
Okay.
perhaps coming from your office, from the information office.
Okay. I think one best practice really is to establish a good learners a student support system, because some of the questions of students will really be recurring. Like, for example, how do I access the learning management system? Where do I get tech support? Where do I access this library material? If those things are already established, then the teacher can just refer them instead of answering them by one by one. So the teacher can just send a link. Okay, access this particular link. Ask help from tech support or help desk. So I think that's one of the best practice that I would recommend, so that teachers would not be overwhelmed, because otherwise you are since you are new in online teaching, you are just developing your course materials, and then you would be navigating all the information that you would be providing your students, and you don't know how to answer them because the support system is not established. So I think that's a good a best practice that I would probably recommend and share to you.
Okay. Thank you. In relation to support system, there is a question here from Mr. Jonathan Markte. Have you encountered any disciplinary problems with students, say for example, cyberbullying, harassment, etc.? And how was this process? And let me add, do you have something like a institutional policy related into this that will process in an online environment?
Yes. Okay. Thank you for that. Yes. We encounter those things. So this should actually be part of policies in all levels. So it should be part of your course policy, and then there should be an institutional level. So it can be a course, a department, a college, and then the institutional level. So on the course level, you should be very clear in your course guide. What are your policies? Uh, that you will apply in your course. So, like for example, that includes bullying, harassment, and what are included in cyberbullying. Those things should be very clearly articulated in your course outline, so that if that happens, you will just call the attention of that student. Uh, that can probably a first offense, first, is that an offense? First notice,
Yeah.
first notice, then you would call the attention of that student and refer him or her to that course guideline. In the absence of a guideline, it would be very difficult for you, because you don't have a policy or a guideline to refer to. So those guidelines should be part of your course guide. It should be very, very clear there, so that students would know that, oh, my teacher is very serious when it comes to this type of concerns.
Thank you. And Many actually of our attendees here are most probably first-time online facilitators or teachers, and there are many issues like can all classes be delivered online? Like for the question of Flora Irad, can laboratory classes go online, like chemistry laboratory?
Yeah, actually there was I would like to recommend, we did we call it a edu hack. It's a podcast, a webcast series, and we tackle all kinds of disruptions that happen. So one of the topics there is recreating science labs at home. So after this talk, I will share the link to Dave so Dave can share it with everyone. But one of the lessons, one of the things I've gathered from that discussion is that you can recreate labs at home. But of course, there would be limitations, especially for chemistry, because it would be very difficult if students will be handling chemicals on their own. But for other courses, they you can recreate them by using existing materials at home. I'm not a science major, but I can share that particular talk. It tackled about chemistry, biology, and physics. So I think you would be able to get something out of it.
Yeah. From chemistry, let's jump to accounting. Can you give a sample class schedule for an accountancy class having 11 chapters of discussions where in usual face-to-face sessions will include class lectures, seat work, assignment, quizzes, chapter exams, and the like?
Okay. So the key here is really to redesign your courses, your face-to-face courses into online. So when you redesign it, one of the outputs is it's actually a course pack. So you can either the choices that you have is one is to create a module from scratch, which would be, I think, impossible given the current schedule that we are. I think when's your start, in September or August?
In August.
In August. So that's impossible to do now. But the second thing is you can do or develop a study guide. A study guide actually it's like a mini module wherein you develop that mini module, and you put together or the learning resources and the learning activities there. But it should, before you do that, there are certain tasks that you follow. So for example, you have to restructure the course content, like you chunk them based on per unit. So for example, you have 11 chapters of discussion, so you can probably break that down into 4 units. So 4 units is the main, it's like the main topic. And then for each unit, you can break it into modules, or probably the equivalent to the chapter. And then for that chapter, you can break that down into sessions. So when you break this down, it should be chunked according to weeks instead of by the hour. Because as I've said, if you will be doing this purely online, it would be impossible for you to conduct face-to-face sessions all the time. So you have to put together the course package, or the study guide, the course guide, the learning resources. So you can call it a course package. And the students can go through it following the schedule uh, that you ask them. For example, chapter 1 or module 1 is week 1. So for example, that's week 1. And then what are the topics and subtopics that they will go through in order to address the learning outcomes for that particular module. And then you will refer them to a learning resource. So for example, for that particular topic, they should read chapter 1 and 2 of this accounting book. Now, to help them, you have to make sure that that the discussion is already targeted. So, for example, you ask them, the learning resource is chapter 1 to 2 of accounting book. Then you do an annotation so that they are specifically focused on that particular chapter, what they will learn from that specific chapter. Then, after that chapter, what type of activity will they do after reading that particular chapter. So it's not enough that you just ask your student to read chapter 1 and 2. What will they do after reading? Then that's the time that you develop learning activities. So for example, after reading chapter 1 and 2, you develop your own cash flow. I don't know, I'm not an accountant. I just example. So that's a type of learning activity that you can do. So there's always an activity for every learning resource that they would go through. So I mean, that's an example of how you redesign your course material.
Thank you very much. And I will acknowledge Iris Utuhan for raising your hand. And you can now talk if you like, Miss Iris.
Hello, sir. It
Mm-hmm.
was already addressed about the policies on the bullying. It
Okay.
was the same question.
Okay, thank you. And let me go back to the chat. Oh, by the way, for those who are on Facebook, you can also post your questions through the comment box there, and our staff will be the one to share the question. So that let's take this opportunity while Doc Joanne is here. She's always busy, but she gave me this time. Anyway, we have one question also from chemistry to accounting. Now let's proceed to directing. I teach a directing class where students are traditionally required to produce a play. How can I pivot this to an online class? And does this require a whole reconceptualization of what theater practice is?
Yeah, definitely directing a class would be you can definitely teach this online, but of course you have to redesign your learning activities. So for example, you're asking your students to do script writing together, and they have to work together inside the classroom. Then you will ask them now to work collaboratively. So you would suggest a good platform for them. They can start with probably a Facebook group chat. But what is important here is that the guide on what you want them to do is very, very clear. So in online teaching and learning, there are basically two types of summative assessment. One is it's like an assignment. An assignment comes in many form. It can be an output, like for this directing class, it can be a script. It can be a script of a play. But the key here is that you should be very specific. You should have a very clear guide on what the students will be doing. So when I say clear guide, this should be very clear tasks, step by step tasks on what they will do, what is expected of them, and then at the end you already have a rubric or a criteria on how their work will be evaluated. So instead, you just imagine if you were in a traditional class, you will be teaching them and then you will be asking them face to face. But then you become creative now. If you're doing it online, if you still wanted to explain it orally or verbally, then you can probably do a Zoom lecture like this one. But as I've said, uh, it would be very tiring for you to explain it over and over again if not all students will be attending. So what you can do is you can probably do a video a recording of your video lecture of your explanation, and then upload it to your course site. And then it can be accompanied by a very detailed task on what you are expecting your students to produce.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. So from directing, one post from the from Facebook. Good afternoon. How can we teach an online class for PE subjects?
PE. Okay. So again, the key here is the guide. It should be very clear. And then since it's heavy on psychomotor and it should be seen by the students, so you can show videos or you can do simulations. But I think video is a very good demonstration on how to do a certain physical education activity. So for example, at UPOU, we have a yoga class, for example. So the students watch yoga demo or video demo step by step on, for example, this particular stands or yoga stand is like this, then you ask the student to do this. So it should be a procedural, so it should be very clear and specific on when in terms of giving your guidelines to your students, but they should be able to see something. That's why a video is also important. Now, if you will not be able to produce your own video, you can always find videos from YouTube and from other learning resources. But what is important is that you should check that the publisher or the creator of that content is trustworthy, and that you have the license to use that particular material. So you have to check if it has a Creative Commons license. So these are open licenses which allows you to freely use a material, freely download and share it. If it's copyrighted, then you have to ask permission, or what you can do is you just put a link so that students will just go to that link instead of you embedding it to your course site, especially if it's copyrighted.
Okay. Thank you. From classroom, let's proceed to another unit from our director of the Office of Instruction. Do you have a template on how to evaluate teachers teaching online, and how will their superiors or deans or chairs evaluate their teaching performance?
Yes, we have a two types of evaluation. So it's a student evaluation of teachers. So there, they evaluate not just the teacher but the course material. So you evaluate the course material. This is the material that I was talking about earlier, the one that you develop and design. And then you also, the students also evaluate the facilitation of the teacher. A facilitation here is not just verbal or oral, but the entire management of the course. And then there's also peer review. So, for example, my course site will be reviewed by my colleague using a specific peer review criteria. So that's on the peer review level, and then the supervisor would take a look at it and decide whether it's good or not, or what to do with it.
Okay. And let me go back with in relation to plagiarism. Can you share with UPOU's rules and actions are on plagiarism?
Yeah. So again, this is again should be part of your policy on a course level and institutional level. So on a course level, you should have a very clear policy. And then in my course, I asked them to sign that they are saying that this is their own work, and that if found otherwise, they will be given a grade of 5. And then, of course, the university should have a plagiarism software for checking, like Turnitin, so that you would, you'd always double check when in doubt. So in assessing the work of your student, you should really be able to monitor their work, so that you would see if there are changes in the way they write. If you would see that, oh, this is not the way that the student writes, so you can probably check it and turn it in, or just paste it in Google, and then you would see that it's plagiarized. The key here is that you have to just make sure that your students know that you are very serious when it comes to plagiarism. So it should be very clear in your course guide. It should be part of your course policy that if they are found to guilty of plagiarism, then they will be given a grade of 5 or a failing grade, or probably expelled from the university.
Yeah, and what else? From the registrar's office, what technical preparations and support in terms of skills and equipments are needed for first-time faculty teaching online?
Okay, so I think this webinar is a good start. So basically, definitely, if it's your first time, and I've shown in the later part of my presentation the different roles. So I think first, of course, you should have the skill in how to design and develop your course material, the skill on how to facilitate online teaching and learning, and then the skill on how to provide student support to your students. In terms of equipment, uh, this is for the institutional or for the teacher?
I
For
think both
both.
institutional and
Okay. So
because
for the
every
institutional, I think the ICTD office should really be on top of this. So there should be like for example the LMS should be housed probably on cloud so that to be probably faster and more secure. And then on the teacher side, I'm not sure, of course, on the policy of the Silliman University, but for UPOU, we are provided with laptops because we have been basically, this is our classroom. So this is our equipment issued to us by the university. So it would be helpful if that's something that you can do. But of course, if not, then you have to make do with the existing equipment that you have. But of course, a good preparation also is on how to use the learning management system so that you'll be able to navigate all the functionalities of the system.
okay, thank you. The next two questions related to perhaps this is related to internship. Please share best practices for student teachers doing practicum in an online teaching. Or maybe the question should be, do you have online practicum for online teachers?
Okay. I'm not sure for the online practicum because before the lockdown, even if we're delivering our courses online, our students are assigned to various institutions to do their practicum. But I would think that you can actually do this now because all institutions are delivering their courses online. Then a student can actually do a practicum there because everything will be done online anyway. So student can practice online teaching, and probably the student can have some skills on instructional design, on facilitation skills. So I would think this is actually much easier now because all institutions are now offering their courses online.
Yeah, that's true. And what about what is good alternative to courses that would require internship or an actual coverage of a media event like a city council session or perhaps a press conference?
I think this is still possible because what you can just do is to make an institutional arrangement. For example, you're covering a media event, a session, for example, you should just ask permission from the council to be part of that. So if it is a Zoom session, then you can join the Zoom session and cover that particular event. So that, for example, in my office, the information office, we are now called, by the way, Office of Public Affairs. So we cover sessions now via Zoom. So for example, last July 2, there was a student consultation by the UP system among our students, and it was conducted via Zoom. So there was an assigned staff who covered the event. So it's basically just reimagining now yourself in this new normal. So this actually makes you more creative because basically you would still have the same output, right? But you would rethink and be more creative and thinking of the process on how you will achieve that particular output.
Yeah. Okay. And another question also, based on your best practices, how did you schedule the subject? I think this is a matter of the scheduling. To avoid conflict between schedules, and what guidelines did you set to avoid free willing or changing of schedules?
Okay, so this isn't a problem for UPOU because we deliver our courses asynchronously. So basically, there are no fixed
Schedule.
synchronous schedule. Now, if the teacher of that particular subject feels that he or she needs to do a synchronous lecture or discussion, then it's up to him to schedule uh, with the students because this will not happen. Synchronous lecture does not happen daily, it does not happen weekly because it would be very difficult to um, you know, gather everyone, if each person has a different context. As I've said earlier, maybe one student is experiencing brownout, another student does not have money to pay for the load, because a Zoom lecture requires data, and it would require money from the student. So you should really balance this when you are planning your course. You should balance the degree of synchronicity. If your intention is just to do a lecture, like for example not a Q&A type, just to deliver a content, you can always resort to a video lecture, so that students can just go through them uh, at their own pace and time. And then you can just strategically schedule a synchronous one if you want a discussion like this. But the lecture part can be done in a different mode. It can be through a recorded content, video recorded content.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. And what about delivering a synchronous exam, Dr. Serrano? Do you give online exams, or are online exams advisable? Teachers, many of our colleagues are actually worried about cheating. Any tips based from your experience?
Yes. So part of the design, of course, but of course, what I'm saying, it would depend on the subject, and depend on the course. But one of the idea here, of course, is when you redesign your course, you have to think of other forms of assessment, and you have to integrate it in the design of your course. So
Mhm.
instead of just relying on a summative exam, you can probably integrate other forms of assessment throughout the course. So like for example, you can do a process portfolio wherein students will be regularly documenting what they are doing, what they have been learning, etc. So there are various performance-based and authentic type of assessment that you can integrate in the design of your courses. And then you can probably think of, very content-specific questions, so that students will not, uh, even if even if they copy, it wouldn't make sense because it's very contextualized. But if you are the type of teacher who is really comfortable in doing exams, then that is something that Silliman University can explore. UPOU has its own online exam system, but it's not open source, so this is not something that we can share. But there are off-the-shelf platform that you can probably purchase, or there's a crude way of doing it, wherein you put in cameras, three camera setup, camera facing the
Monitor.
screen of the monitor of the student, a camera facing the face of the student, and a camera facing the other environment of the student, and the student is writing through a Google Docs, so that you can monitor what the student is doing. So this is an invigilated type of exam, and you can actually do a process or procedure for this, which is contextualized to your university, but that's something that you can probably do. But of course, when you do this, this means that it would take some time for you to proctor it, because you would really be monitoring the setup of the students, and it would be difficult for students to find many cameras to set up in their homes,
And many smartphones,
many
most probably.
smartphones. Yeah, so those are some considerations.
Uh, Dr. Rano, we also have thinking of during our planning in relation to screen time among the students. Well, good for UPOU that you are more into to asynchronous, and it's only a freewheeling among colleague, or I mean teachers of the synchronous. But for an institution who is first time in an online distance learning, what do you think is an ideal number of hours for screen time for students, or most probably for teachers? Well, for teachers, it is assumed that for a unit lecture, it's a 54 hours contact, that's in the face to face. But what about in an online distance learning?
So when you say here screen time is like asynchronous,
Yes, yes.
synchronous, yeah.
Yeah. And
Uh,
maybe adding the time of the students during the asynchronous.
okay. Well, I'm not really sure because we haven't really experienced doing
Yeah.
it synchronously. But when we design our courses, it's based on weeks. So, like for example, one semester is 14 to 16 weeks. So, we design the content based on week. So, for example, week one should be able to finish the discussion of this content of this topic, and then so probably if this a week one, um probably a 1 hour session, if you would like to really do a synchronous type, you can do it once a week, and if you, so that it will not be very difficult for your students, you can do a chat, synchronous chat instead of a video session. So video session you can probably have a once a month or twice a month, and then the rest of synchronous can be chat. I was just thinking of the inclusivity, on the equity part, uh, of your students, because I'm thinking especially in the provinces, there are many challenges in terms of internet connectivity. So if that's really one of the challenges, if you would require them to do a synchronous type of interaction. But yeah, I think you can include probably once a week synchronous type of interaction for each course.
Okay, thank you very much. And checking on Facebook, I think we already, thanks by the way, according to our Office of Instruction and Director, because as of the moment also, Dr. Rano, we are trying to revamp not just simply on the classroom, but on all aspects of the teaching and learning component. We learned a lot, especially in the assessment component, assessment in relation to performance among the student, I mean, among the teachers, and at the same time, in terms of the policy on student discipline in the committee and other stuff. And I think there are no more questions. And thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, and it's so nice to see you again.
Yes. After a long time.
After a long time, and hope to see you. Any other questions from the audience? I think there's being none. And from our panelists and attendees and on Facebook, thank you very much for watching us. For those who ask, about the material or the lecture material of our speaker, we will send you via email. We will send the material via email. And please check it out also the evaluation form so that you can also receive the certificate of participation in attending this webinar. Thank you very much, Dr. Joanne. And as part of our, this is for the meantime, while we are on the webinar and we cannot travel yet. Thank you very much. This is from Seliman University and of course from the Mariano Silao Innovation Creation Invention Laboratory. This is our Mariano Lao webinar series on online distance teaching learning. Present the certificate of recognition to our speaker, Dr. Joanne Serrano, for her invaluable sharing and knowledge sharing as a guest speaker during our first series of the Mariano Lao webinar series with the topic online distance teaching and learning, held today, July 4th, via Zoom online. Medyo nanibago pa po ako, Doc Serrano, reading citations like via Zoom online. Signed yours
You'll get used
truly.
to it.
So, signed yours truly as the project leader of Dr. Mariano Lau ICI Laboratory and the newly appointed director of the Silliman Online University Learning. Thank you very much.
Thank you po.
Uh, as an announcement, we would like to share with you our series of webinars. This is again in relation to our preparation to equip all of us teachers in an online distance teaching and learning. Here are the topics. For the next week, we will be talking about flip learning. This was mentioned also in the lecture of Dr. Serrano. Flip learning, the inverted learning, but this time, this gonna be more of experiences from a teacher and from a learner. I'm so happy to invite also our student from the agriculture department, from the College of Agriculture, who will be sharing his experiences during the summer term as to how he manages his time, because this is a new normal really in the teaching and learning. And of course, at the same time, also our colleague in the university will be sharing more practices as she gathered also other practices from the other university. We will be sharing with you the link, the open Zoom, the Zoom link for you to be able to register in this webinar. And here are the list of topics, and so that we can also invite other students, and they can also have some references or perhaps some guidelines in doing all of this. And I'm so happy that many of these topics were mentioned by our speaker today as a kickoff, no, as a start of our 12 sessions in this preparation for the new normal of teaching and learning. So this is the link of our post webinar, and I hope we will be posting this actually via Facebook and on chat, so that you can evaluate, no, our webinar for this afternoon. And at the same time, we would be able to send to you the lecture material, the PowerPoint presentation of our speaker for today. And at the same time, we can send you your digital certificate for the first ever webinar series on the online distance teaching and learning at Silliman University. So once again, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us, and see you next Saturday. Bye-bye.